Chapter 10 of the Europeans. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The Europeans by Henry James. Chapter 10. The first Sunday that followed Robert Acton's return from Newport witnessed a change in the brilliant weather that had long prevailed. The rain began to fall and the day was cold and dreary. Mr. Wentworth and his daughters put on overshoes and went to church, and Felix Young, without overshoes, went also, holding an umbrella over Gertrude. It is to be feared that, in the whole observance, this was the privilege he most highly valued. The Baroness remained at home; she was in neither a cheerful nor a devotional mood. She had, however, never been, during her residence in the United States, what is called a regular attendant at divine service, and on this particular Sunday morning of which I began with speaking, she stood at the window of her little drawing-room, watching the long arm of a rose-tree that was attached to her piazza, but a portion of which had disengaged itself, sway to and fro, shake and gesticulate, against the dusky drizzle of the sky. Every now and then, in a gust of wind, the rose-tree scattered a shower of water-drops against the window-pane. It appeared to have a kind of human movement, a menacing, warning intention. The room was very cold. Madame Münster put on a shawl and walked about. Then she determined to have some fire; and summoning her ancient negress, the contrast of whose polished ebony and whose crimson turban had been at first a source of satisfaction to her, she made arrangements for the production of a crackling flame. This old woman's name was Azarina. The Baroness had begun by thinking that there would be a savory wildness in her talk, and, for amusement, she had encouraged her to chatter. But Azarina was dry and prim. Her conversation was anything but African. She reminded Eugenia of the tiresome old ladies she met in society. She knew, however, how to make a fire, so that after she had laid the logs, Eugenia, who was terribly bored, found a quarter of an hour's entertainment in sitting and watching them blaze and sputter. She had thought it very likely Robert Acton would come and see her; she had not met him since that infelicitous evening. But the morning waned without his coming. Several times she thought she heard his step on the piazza, but it was only a window shutter shaking in a rain gust. The Baroness, since the beginning of that episode in her career of which a slight sketch has been attempted in these pages, had had many moments of irritation; but to-day her irritation had a peculiar keenness. It appeared to feed upon itself. It urged her to do something. But it suggested no particularly profitable line of action. If she could have done something at the moment, on the spot, she would have stepped upon a European steamer and turned her back, with a kind of rapture, upon that profoundly mortifying failure, her visit to her American relations. It is not exactly apparent why she should have termed this enterprise a failure, inasmuch as she had been treated with the highest distinction for which allowance had been made in American institutions. Her irritation came, at bottom, from the sense, which, always present, had suddenly grown acute, that the social soil on this big, vague continent was somehow not adapted for growing those plants whose fragrance she especially inclined to inhale, and by which she liked to see herself surrounded; a species of vegetation for which she carried a collection of seedlings, as we may say, in her pocket. She found her chief happiness in the sense of exerting a certain power and making a certain impression; and now she felt the annoyance of a rather wearied swimmer, who, on nearing shore, to land, finds a smooth, straight wall of rock when he had counted upon a clean, firm beach. Her power, in the American air, seemed to have lost its prehensile attributes. The smooth wall of rock was insurmountable. "Surely je n'en suis pas là," she said to herself, "that I let it make me uncomfortable that a Mr. Robert Acton shouldn't honor me with a visit." Yet she was vexed that he had not come, and she was vexed at her vexation. Her brother, at least, came in, stamping in the hall and shaking the wet from his coat. In a moment he entered the room, with a glow in his cheek and half a dozen raindrops glistening on his moustache. "Ah, you have a fire," he said. "Les beaux jours sont passés," replied the Baroness. "Never, never! They have only begun," Felix declared, planting himself before the hearth. He turned his back to the fire, placed his hands behind him, extended his legs and looked away through the window with an expression of face which seemed to denote the perception of rose color even in the tints of a wet Sunday. His sister, from her chair, looked up at him, watching him, and what she saw in his face was not grateful to her present mood. She was puzzled by many things, but her brother's disposition was a frequent source of wonder to her. I say frequent and not constant, for there were long periods during which she gave her attention to other problems. Sometimes she had said to herself that his happy temper, his eternal gaiety, was an affectation, a pose; but she was vaguely conscious that during the present summer he had been a highly successful comedian. They had never yet had an explanation; she had not known the need of one. Felix was presumably following the bent of his disinterested genius, and she felt that she had no advice to give him that he would understand. With this, there was always a certain element of comfort about Felix, the assurance that he would not interfere. He was very delicate, this pure-minded Felix. In effect, he was her brother, and Madame Münster felt that there was a great propriety, every way, in that. It is true that Felix was delicate; he was not fond of explanations with his sister. This was one of the very few things in the world about which he was uncomfortable. But now he was not thinking of anything uncomfortable. "Dear brother," said Eugenia at last, "do stop making les yeux doux at the rain." "With pleasure. I will make them at you," answered Felix. "How much longer," asked Eugenia in a moment, "do you propose to remain in this lovely spot?" Felix stared. "Do you want to go away? Already?" "Already is delicious. I am not so happy as you." Felix dropped into a chair, looking at the fire. "The fact is, I am happy," he said in his light, clear tone. "And do you propose to spend your life in making love to Gertrude Wentworth?" "Yes," said Felix, smiling sideways at his sister. The Baroness returned his glance, much more gravely, and then, "Do you like her?" she asked. "Don't you?" Felix demanded. The Baroness was silent a moment. "I will answer you in the words of the gentleman who was asked if he liked music. Je ne la crains pas." "She admires you immensely," said Felix. "I don't care for that. Other women should not admire one." "They should dislike you?" Again Madame Münster hesitated. "They should hate me. It's a measure of the time I have been losing here that they don't." "No time is lost in which one has been happy," said Felix with a bright sententiousness which may well have been a little irritating. "And in which," rejoined his sister with a harsher laugh, "one has secured the affections of a young lady with a fortune." Felix explained, very candidly and seriously. "I have secured Gertrude's affection, but I am by no means sure that I have secured her fortune. That may come, or it may not." "Ah, well, it may. That's the great point." "It depends upon her father. He doesn't smile upon our union. You know he wants her to marry Mr. Brand." "I know nothing about it!" cried the Baroness. "Please to put on a log." Felix complied with her request, and sat watching the quickening of the flame. Presently his sister added, "And you propose to elope with Mademoiselle?" "By no means. I don't wish to do anything that's disagreeable to Mr. Wentworth. He has been far too kind to us." "But you must choose between pleasing yourself and pleasing him." "I want to please everyone!" exclaimed Felix joyously. "I have a good conscience. I made up my mind at the outset that it was not my place to make love to Gertrude."